So, Ravens flock, some major news regarding the state of the AFC North broke earlier today. Wide receiver George Pickens was traded from the Steelers to the Cowboys. The Steelers traded Pickens as well as a sixth round pick in exchange for a third round pick and a 2027 fifth round pick. Now, I had a feeling George Pickens wouldn't still be on the Steelers beyond next year, especially once they traded for DK Metcalf and gave DK that large amount of money. But I wasn't expecting it to play out like this. Like, this is a very interesting plot twist in this offseason. We as Ravens fans were very familiar with George Pickens, of course. He's a guy who is very talented. He was Pittsburgh's #1 receiver. When Pittsburgh had this garbage offense over the past several years, Pickens was the only bright spot for those Steeler fans while they watch themselves fall into mediocrity and fall into the inevitable 9-8 realm that they fall into. Pickens never really went off against us, but he still had decent numbers when he played us. He played us about 5 or 6 times. He had 24 catches, 413 yards, 2 touchdowns. Nothing super impressive, but when he's played other teams, he's had games where he is going completely crazy. And the part about Pickens that's most fascinating, of course, is the fact that he's a guy who, throughout his career, he's never actually played with a good quarterback. Like, he went from Kenny Pickens to a washed up version of Russell Wilson, and like that's pretty. And then also Justin Fields, who, I mean, it's hit or miss depending on who you talk to and how they feel about Fields. But either way, he's never played with a really good quarterback, and still, he's been a guy who's put up 800 yards, 900 yards, 1100 yards. But clearly, the Steelers have decided that they don't think he's worth the headache. There's always the talk about how he has a bad attitude, an attitude problem, which I think a big part of that is simply because he's literally playing on a team that's going nowhere fast, and he doesn't have a real quarterback. He's just kind of, even right now in the offseason, they don't have a quarterback in Pittsburgh. That's why I kept saying a few videos ago, I don't know what the Steelers are really trying to do. I don't think they're a real threat to us at this point. Now, can things change? I doubt it. But what's so interesting to me is how many Steeler fans are excited about this trade. And I don't really get it, because you gave up a third for a young George Pickens who still has some untapped potential, but you traded a second to get a guy in DK Metcalf who is 4 years older than DK, who at this point in DK's career, there is no higher ceiling that he could possibly be. DK Metcalf is who he is. And even though DK is a big name, DK is not a guy, in my opinion, who's really that great of a receiver. He definitely, in my opinion, isn't better than George Pickens, honestly, even though he has more star power. I don't think he's any better than George at all. Ironically, all the things that Steeler fans and NFL fans complain about regarding Pickens, I mean, DK has some of these same problems. DK has been known to crash out on some people. He's run some lazy routes and given up on plays. Like, it's the same problems. The only difference is DK's older. So at this point in DK's career, you know who he is. At the very least, with Pickens, maybe you could hold out hope that he can kind of grow out of that and maximize his full potential. But again, I don't know what the Steelers are doing. Now, maybe they're just the smartest in the room and whatever, because the Steelers have had a history of trading wide receivers who were really good for them, and things work out for them and don't work out for the wide receiver as much. We think about guys like Chase Claypool or even Antonio Brown, even though Antonio Brown still had some success afterwards and, won a Super Bowl with Tampa. Then even most recently, Deontay Johnson, sending him out. Like, it's worked out for them. Will this also be a case? Will it work where it works out for them? I don't know. I guess time will tell, but on paper, it just looks like a very bad decision. Like, you gave up a second-round pick to get a 28-year-old B plus wide receiver who has A plus athletic score, I guess you could say. but then a few months later you trade a younger version of that guy who may be better than that guy, even though he may not be as physically gifted. I think it's a fascinating decision. And as Ravens fans, I would definitely laughing, at least right now. Maybe something crazy happens and it works out for them, but I really can't see it, to be honest with you. Now, I still think about George Pickens and the fact that we should have gotten him in 2022 in exchange for David Ojabo, who the Ravens picked in the second round. And I know the psychology of a lot of Ravens fans, so I already know if you bring up this point from here on out, a lot of Ravens fans are going to try to respond to that and say something along the lines of, hey, Pickens isn't even all that. The Steelers gave up on him and traded him. I'm not trying to hear none of that. At the end of the day, George Pickens is more talented than all the receivers we have right now, attitude or not. Not saying things can't change. Maybe an injury happens, but maybe not. But as far as what George Pickens has done his first 3 seasons, he's a better receiver than what we've had in the past decade. You look at it seems like pretty much every season he's making this unbelievable acrobatic catch that turns iconic. The dude has like 3 or 4 iconic catches, and he's only been in the league for like 3 seasons. And to this day, that one mistake that Eric DeCosta made is all the proof that I need that the whole best player available concept, it's a myth. It's absolutely a myth. Because how can you draft an injured player in the second round you drafted an injured edge rusher in the second round over a healthy wide receiver 1 when you didn't even have that established? I can't wrap my head around it to this day. And regardless of the Steelers giving up on Pickens, they still got the most value out of Pickens. This is why I don't like when Ravens fans go on these ridiculous crusades of wanting to be the moral police. It is not our jobs to be the moral police. Like, it's such a stupid mentality to think like, hey, we don't want that guy because he has an attitude problem. It's gonna cause some friction in the locker room. Dude, even if he has an attitude problem, get the most value out of him by letting him play on a cheap rookie deal. And then if you don't want to deal with him beyond that point, do what Pittsburgh just did, which is move on from him before it's time to pay him. You could still go out and get top tier talent and keep them for short periods of time. But for whatever reason, a lot of Ravens fans, they'll see someone like Pickens and they won't want to go after him because of silly things regarding him not being a good locker room presence, him having an attitude problem, all these silly excuses. And it makes us look ridiculous because all the while when Ravens fans are saying, let's not get George Pickens because he has an attitude, let's not get this pass rusher because he may have an attitude, or this proven pass rusher because he may have an attitude, let's not get Tyreek Hill because he has an attitude, let's not get Hassan Reddick because he has an attitude. But the irony of it all is we literally had a field goal kicker, as legendary as Tucker is, he was just a kicker, and he's being accused of what he's being accused of. And we're worried about, I'm going off on a tangent. Either way, regarding Pittsburgh, I said this after the draft when I said, hey, which AFC North rival has made the biggest leap? Honestly, I thought it was Cleveland. And one thing I said in that video was I think that Cleveland is going to leapfrog Pittsburgh, because when you look at Pittsburgh's draft, when you look at their offseason, I was saying this before they traded Pickens. I was like, when you look at their moves in the draft and free agency, I was like, I don't understand what they're going for. They're waiting for a 42-year-old Aaron Rodgers. I don't understand what is the goal here. Why are they trying to do all this unnecessary nonsense just to get to the inevitable point of 9-8? And then the funniest part is they waited till after the draft to trade him. You would think this type of trade would have happened on draft night so they could get an extra pick in the draft, but again, the moves don't make sense to me, man. I'm starting to think that the Steelers may finally go for the tank, just go all in, but I also can't see that happening either. But one thing I do know is when the Ravens play the Steelers this upcoming season, I do think it will be a bit easier, just simply because at the end of the day, on the outside, the only person we will be worried about is DK Metcalf. I can't remember the name of the young receivers on Pittsburgh right now, but I highly doubt any of them are going to be nearly as impactful as George Pickens, especially right now. Maybe next year they develop into that, but I can't see any of them jumping in right now and making that big of a difference, especially when, as of right now, there is no quarterback. Their quarterback room is like Will Howard or whatever. So either way, I think our secondary should be very impressive when we play Pittsburgh this year. But that's just what I think. Let me know what you think. Do you think this trade is a trade that makes it that much easier for the Ravens to dominate Pittsburgh and get back on the right side of things when it comes to our rivalry because we took more L's than we should have the past few years? Or do you think that this move really doesn't make a difference and we're still going to beat them, but it's not going to be in a dominant fashion? It'll just be more of a dogfight.